The grind is right. You want to get as close to the edge as you can without going over. I know you're busy, so let's get to it. Okay, first a little terminology because the names can be a bit misleading. The primary bevel is the bigger of the two. It's the one near the top of the chisel. It tends to be a rough texture, and it's basically the angle that comes pre-ground on the chisel. And even though it looks sharp, it's not sharp enough to use. It's about 5 to 10 degrees less than the final angle that you're going to want to hone and polish on the chisel. The secondary bevel is the business end of the tool. It's the one that you want to keep polished like a mirror. And you want to keep it as small as you can, as narrow this way as you can. And you can see this chisel is one that I've been using. It's actually gone a little too far. This is a lot farther than I usually like to let it get. But once we grind the primary bevel back on there, the secondary bevel will get smaller. So you're basically, it's like a war of the bevels. As you hone and polish, the secondary bevel gets bigger, and then as you grind, the primary bevel gets bigger. So why does grinding make sharpening faster? It works because we're removing material behind the working edge of the chisel so that there's less material to remove when we hone and polish the secondary bevel. So how often should you grind? Well, that depends on a few things. One, it depends on the steel. An O1 steel is softer and will hone and polish faster versus an A1 or a PMV11, which does take quite a bit longer to hone and polish. So I might grind this chisel a little more often than I would an O1 chisel. It depends on the width of your blade. A plain blade obviously has a lot more material to remove, especially if you're putting a camber on it. So the wider that secondary bevel gets, the more work you got to do to get sharp. So you may want to grind it a little bit sooner. I can usually get 5 to 10 honing and polishings on a chisel or a plane iron before it's time for me to grind. So when I hear grinding, I think of a bench grinder, and that's how I grind my chisels. But you don't have to use a powered grinder. You can use a hand crank grinder, which is how I started out, or you can use something as simple as silicon dioxide sandpaper or honing film. If you're going to use something like that, stick it to a surface that's relatively flat. Put it in your honing guide, and you can do this freehand, but you get better consistency if you use a honing guide. Set your honing guide to 5 or 10 degrees less than the final bevel that you're going to sharpen to, which in this case would be 30 degrees. So I'm going to move this up here. Then put it on the sandpaper and grind it. It may take a little bit longer, but it's just as effective. So let's go over to the bench grinder and I'll show you how I like to grind the primary bevels on my chisels and irons. Okay, so here we are at the grinder. This grinder has some Norton wheels that are made pretty much for this purpose. They're made to run about as cool as they can. They're highly friable, which means the media comes off quickly, so they do wear out faster than your normal wheels, but it's worth it for the insurance not to burn the steel. You'll see me set up the tool rest to an angle that's about halfway back from this edge to that edge, and that's so that I can closely match the ground angle that was there before. The final angle isn't that important as long as it's 5 or 10 degrees less than what you plan to sharpen and hone. The other thing to keep in mind is you need to dress the wheel with a crown, and I'll probably do that right as we get started. And you need to have a little bit of water to quench with on a regular basis, but you should be taking really light cuts. So the steel shouldn't get all that hot. So I keep the cup there as protection, and usually I'll dip it in the cup before I check my work, but I want to make sure that I take really light cuts and I don't heat up and burn the steel. Let's go ahead and get set up and grind this chisel really quick, and then we can go back to the stones and I can show you how fast it is to sharpen this blade. Looks pretty good. There you go. That's what I call the Price is Right method of grinding. You get as close as you can to the edge without going over. Let's go back to the bench and sharpen this chisel. Okay, we're back from the grinder, and we've made our primary bevel as big as we can make it without going over the edge. And because we didn't go over the edge, we don't have to worry about the shape being changed on the end of the chisel. We don't have to worry about a burr on the back from the grinder. And because we took light cuts, the temper of the steel has been preserved. We also now have the smallest amount of material possible to hone and polish the next time we sharpen. If you'd like to see my method for sharpening chisels, take a look at this video here. If you'd like to see a playlist with a few other sharpening videos, click down here. I'll see you in the next one.